Today is Reign of Christ Sunday. We're not singing Crown Him with Many Crowns today, but we may think of Jesus as king, or teacher, or shepherd, and or friend. I invite you to reflect on the image of Jesus which speaks to you as I read today's gospel lesson from the book of Luke, chapter 17, verses 11 through 19. Well, with Thanksgiving this week, I felt it fitting to share about gratitude. Now, I'm aware that holidays with family can be challenging, and some folks get depressed about the family they will not be seeing, but today we're going to focus on nurturing our gratitude. Gratitude, like anxiety, is often framed as a private feeling, but they really are very different. My AI friend shared that gratitude is something we cultivate inwardly to become more serene, more content, more spiritually centered. But within a theological framework, gratitude is not merely a sentiment. It's an orientation toward the world that insists on seeing and honoring grace in places where dominant culture tells us to overlook it. Gratitude is spiritual resistance. It's a way of recognizing interdependence in a culture obsessed with self-sufficiency. It's a way of honoring the dignity of others in a society that is quick to divide and devalue. And it is a way of responding to the Spirit's work of liberation. In our scripture lesson, 10 people are healed, but only one returns to give thanks. The point is not that the others were ungrateful, it's that gratitude requires noticing. It requires pausing long enough to name what is life-giving in a world that trains us to focus on scarcity, deficiency, and threat. Our theology teaches us to interrogate the systems and narratives that shape our vision. What keeps us from seeing goodness? Often, it's the pace of our lives, the distortions of fear-based ideologies, or the assumption that blessings are earned rather than shared. The Samaritan in this story is doubly marginalized, ethnically, religiously, and because of illness. And yet he is the one who sees. His gratitude is an act of clear vision, recognizing the presence of God where the world said God could not be. And this is the first movement of gratitude, seeing grace in unexpected places, especially among those whom society disregards. Our theology emphasizes the interconnectedness of all creation. Nothing exists in isolation. Nothing survives without relationship. And gratitude is the practice of acknowledging that our lives are sustained by networks of care, labor, earth, and spirit far beyond our individual efforts. When we express gratitude, we're confessing a truth that American individualism denies. We're not self-made. We are shaped and sustained by others. Gratitude is then a countercultural act. It challenges exploitative systems by naming the real sources of our well-being. Farm workers who harvest our food, teachers who formed our minds, nurses who tended our wounds, friends who carried us emotionally, land that holds us, ancestors who dreamed a world we now inhabit. And in our theology, gratitude expands the circle of thank you beyond God alone to include all creatures and communities through whom divine grace flows. It also turns our attention toward what theologian Walter Brueggemann calls neighborliness, the conditions that allow all people to flourish. It fuels justice because it opens our eyes to the sacredness and worth of all. When we practice gratitude, we do not ignore suffering. We become more attuned to it, because once we see what gives life, we become more committed to dismantling what steals it. The Samaritan's return to Jesus is not merely a personal religious gesture. It's a public reorientation of justice, of identity and community. Gratitude moves him from isolation back into relationship, back into the community, and back into agency. Likewise, gratitude invites us to return, not just to God, but to one another. It becomes a public witness to divine abundance in a world ruled by narratives of scarcity. It testifies that another way of living is possible, a way marked by empathy, equity, hospitality, and mutual care. Gratitude, then, it's not passive, it's generative. It compels us to participate in the work of repair, climate justice, racial equity, LGBTQIA+ inclusion, economic fairness, because we recognize these gifts of creation, humanity, and community as sacred trusts. It also becomes the connective tissue between spirituality and justice. It fuels hope that is not naive, resilience that is not denial, and love that is not sentimental. It's love that is structural, embodied, and engaged. I started a new practice for myself several years ago. Often when I'm out and about, I'll say a prayer for the guys that are working on the side of the road, or somebody who's directing traffic, or somebody who's been in an accident. And I'm sure that many of you probably say prayers. It's not unusual. But the one part that I've added in is I say thank you. I ask for the support or guidance or whatever for that person, and then I say thank you, because I'll never know the result of this person on the side of the street. But like the Samaritan, I think that has become a good practice. Now, I'm going to share one story of mine about gratitude, and then we're going to hear stories from a few others of you that I've asked in advance. Now, I don't know about you, but it was hard to just pick one story. You know, there's so many stories about gratitude. So here goes. Several years ago, it was a very, very cold morning. My car was taking forever to heat up on this cold day on my drive to work, and despite wearing gloves, my fingers were still freezing on the still chilly steering wheel as I approached the hill. Now, the hill was ordinarily not an issue to get over, except on this morning there was black ice on it, of which I didn't see until it was too late. So I saw the few cars ahead of me inching along, slipping and sliding back and forth, and some going backwards. It was absolutely terrifying. And it's almost impossible, if you've driven on it, to control your own car, no less what's going to happen with any of the other cars around you. So there were several cars coming down the hill, too, in the other direction, and one of them was a school bus. I really felt sorry for that school bus driver. That must have been terrifying. It was terrifying also seeing a school bus sliding down the hill. At least I was on the other side. So I know I prayed when this was happening. And I wish I had the story that I could tell you that an angel appeared and spoke to me, or Jesus spoke to me. But that's not this story. But it was just me, or so I thought. So I was able to get my tires on the right side, just off the edge of the road, onto some leaves that were still there. They were crunchy. Even though they had some ice on them, they were crunchy, and it allowed a little bit of momentum, and I was able to get up the hill. And so a few other people were doing the same thing. But it was still terrifying, and I didn't want anybody to stop, because if you stop, you lose your momentum, and then you can never get going again. Well, I'm glad that I made it to the top. And the entire drive up the hill, which is not that big a hill, but it was steep, probably took 5 minutes, which ordinarily took seconds, but it felt like hours. Now, I was so proud of myself that I was able to remain calm and clear-minded and know what I had to do in this treacherous situation. But then I pulled over and called my husband, and as I'm relaying the story to him, I just started sobbing. I had no idea how much anxiety and fear I had been holding in. But I was certainly grateful that I made it up without being in an accident, and I know I repeatedly thanked God all that day for what happened to me. Very grateful. So we're going to listen to a few other stories, and I invite you to listen for grace in unexpected places as they share. Catherine, would you like to start us off?
I went to Costa Rica in August, and the last time I was there was in 1985. At the time, I was living in Switzerland and brought along my German friend to spend Easter with my parents, who had just moved there 4 months earlier. We weren't going to be the only guests, as my Filipino grandmother and my aunt had also come from New York. That was to be a very special Easter because My aunt's birthday fell on Easter Sunday. So 40 years later, I was once again returning to this land to attend an ancestral healing retreat. Part of the ancestral healing I wanted to deal with was the 333 years of Spanish colonization and how that affected my Filipino ancestors. And now I was tracing the breakdown of the cohesiveness among my siblings after the death of my mother in January of 2023 as some kind of a residual effect, as I was seeing a kind of judgmentalism that was getting in the way of us being cordial and cooperative with one another. I was equating the kind of behaviors I was seeing in my siblings to how colonizers rule, exercising power over instead of coming from power with and power for. I reflected on my grandmother, who raised 7 children during the war, sending them all to school, only to lose 2 of her 4 sons to the Japanese when they became part of the underground and were eventually captured and killed. I remembered how my quiet, elegant, and prayerful grandmother continued to go to daily mass and pray the rosary for her family and for her country. She was the opposite of being domineering, putting others down, or acting superior to exert dominance. I never heard her raise her voice. She was quiet, always had a ready smile, was orderly. I knew that she had suffered the shame that my grandfather had a mistress. This was not kept secret, as it was public knowledge. She stayed noble. She didn't succumb to feeling a victim. One of the most remarkable realizations I came to was that her 3 daughters were the first university-educated Balthazar women of our heritage, our lineage. And now my sister and I, nieces, granddaughters, and great-granddaughters, continue her legacy. I would like to have had the opportunity to come back to her, to thank and acknowledge her for her steadiness, her prayerfulness, and quiet, noble example that has rippled down the 4 generations that has since flowed from her. I would, in the Filipino way, show respect by taking her hand, kissing it, and putting it up to my forehead as a blessing. Thank you, God, for giving me the example of my grandmother to help me abide in some of those same strong qualities that I so admired in her.
Deidre is online, and Deidre is going to share a story.
I am so grateful this morning for my ancestors, for the gift of sacred words, the sacred words they taught, modeled, and transformed into holy acts of hope. Recently, I had a bad night. You've had them too. Pain of aging joints and muscles, memories of regrets, fears of tomorrow, hours emptying into eternity. Then the inked sky started to shift to that shade of gray that precedes dawn, hinting of lavender and sunrise. That's when I heard my mother's voice say, "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning." Psalms 30:5. I watched my parents live this sacred word. Mother somehow managing to return from cleaning other women's houses so that she might get back before we arrived from school to make a home for us. Father, built-in babysitter, eyes red from never enough sleep during the day to prepare him for a full night's work of throwing mail at 30th Street Station. They always seemed so tired, but never despairing. There was not a lot of sky in North Philadelphia for witnessing dawn. Dawn happened betwixt and behind brick row houses. But I watched my parents start each day with the joy that cometh in the morning. Today, I value my ancestors who kept the faith in word and deed. They showed me what sacred words look like in everyday garb, holy acts of hope. This is dedicated to my Uncle Alfred, my mother's baby brother who joined the ancestors this past week.
My gratitude story. There are many things that I thank God for every day, like a new home, good health, loving relationships with family and friends. And then there are some gratitude stories when a life-changing moment puts you on your knees. Now, I've chosen to share one of those. In a land far away, long ago, 40 years ago, when David and I learned that we were going to have a baby, we were excited and relieved as the pregnancy progressed without problems. Finally, the day arrived to get this baby born. But things weren't progressing in the labor room. I won't go into all the details, but basically, Evan, our son, got stuck in the birth canal. My tailbone was in the way. And have I mentioned his size? 9 pounds, 8 ounces. And he was the smaller of our two babies. Unfortunately, he was too far down the canal for doctors to perform an emergency C-section, and none of the doctors' efforts to extract him were successful. In time, his vital signs weakened and he was in distress. Lucky for us, there was another doctor nearby that heard the commotion, and there was a lot of commotion, and he offered to assist. Between one doctor pushing and the other doctor pulling, and my rock of a husband, David, holding me on the table, our son was finally delivered into this world. He was completely blue. If you are familiar with APGAR scores, it refers to the rapid assessment of a baby's condition at birth. They score a 0, 1, or 2 in 5 different categories like breathing, heart rate, response, etc. A typical score is 7 to 10. Evan scored a 2. There were a few moments there when we considered the possibility of losing him, but we didn't. He recovered. I think it was the next day when nurses wheeled the sleeping baby into my room. I sat quietly in a chair beside him, processing all these events. A group of doctors came in to check on us, and they thought something was wrong when they saw tears streaming down my face. I was so overcome I could barely speak, but I managed to choke out, "He's okay." And they understood my tears of gratitude. I answered the rest of their questions with nods of yes or no because I couldn't stop the flood of emotions. David and I remembered that experience like it happened yesterday. We were and are eternally grateful to live in an age of modern medicine. We are thankful for the tenacity of my doctors and for the nurses and staff who cared for us, and for the strength that God can give an infant to survive a bruising entrance into the world. Now and forever, thanks be to God.
Thank you, Catherine and Joy and Deidre. And Deidre, I'm sorry for the loss for your family of this week. The stories that we hear and gratitude connects us, and I'm grateful for this time that we've had to share stories. I'd like to move on talking about a gratitude journal. Many of you have heard of them. Many of you have probably even tried them, but I know it's not for everybody. And I read of a great spiritual activity to nurture our gratitude. It's referred to as the George Bailey gratitude exercise. It's basically what the angel in It's a Wonderful Life famously asked George Bailey to do, inviting him to imagine a world where our most treasured blessings never occurred. Instead of adding up the gifts in our lives, like you might in a journal, this approach invites us to subtract them. Instead of reflecting on the presence of a positive event in our lives, like I'm grateful for my husband, or you can reflect on its absence. What if I had never met him? So, if you're one of those folks who doesn't really like gratitude lists, give this a try. Sit down one morning or evening and pick something central in your life. It can be something you consider a blessing, but this works just as well with something you're neutral or negative about. So it could be about your spouse, your kid, a risk that you once took, like starting your own business, a physical aspect of yourself, like your hair, or a hobby like playing an instrument or doing a sport, or an injury you suffered, or even a loss. So imagine what your life would be like without this thing in your life. Play out what other things would not have happened if this thing about you didn't exist, and make a list of those things. Spend some time with that list. Add to it and edit it as it feels right. And once it feels finished, reflect on it, paying particular attention to what kind of feelings arose and what sparked those feelings. And finally, if you feel comfortable doing it, share the thing you picked to remove from your life and a list of things that would have disappeared with it. And who should you share that with? Well, you'll know. It's up to you. I have several more thought provokers on gratitude from Soul Matters to leave with you. First one, have you mistaken gratitude for a feeling rather than a practice? Or to put it another way, do you wait for gratitude to arise rather than proactively find ways to cultivate it? The most difficult gifts to be grateful for are the gifts given to us by our suffering and losses. Have you found the gift in the thing you wished hadn't happened? Might gratitude for your life increase if you lessened how much you compare it to the life of others? It's not what we have that constitutes our abundance, but what we appreciate. And lastly, we should be especially grateful for having to deal with annoying people and difficult situations, because without them, we would have nothing to work with. Without them, how could we practice patience, exertion, mindfulness, loving kindness, or compassion? It's by dealing with such challenges that we grow and develop. So we should be very grateful to have them in our lives. As we've heard, gratitude is not merely feeling thankful. It's a radical attentiveness to grace, a confession of interdependence, a tool for ethical discernment, and a catalyst for public transformation. May gratitude open our eyes, may it deepen our commitments, and may it send us into the world not merely thankful, but awakened, connected, and empowered to participate in God's ongoing work of justice and liberation. Amen. May it be so.